Grace was 8 months pregnant when the call came. It was a typical afternoon at home with her 3 children, preparing a simple meal, when the phone rang. She answered it, expecting her husband to tell her he was on his way home from work. Instead, the voice on the other end was cold and detached. It was a doctor from the hospital. "Your husband has collapsed. He's been brought in unconscious. You need to come to the hospital right away." Her heart dropped. She was in shock, hands trembling as she rushed to gather her children and arrange for a neighbor to watch them. Grace hurried to the hospital as quickly as her pregnant body would allow, her mind racing with fear. What had happened? Was he all right? Could this be as serious as it seemed? When she arrived at the hospital, her worst nightmare was confirmed. Her husband hadn't made it. The moment those words reached her ears, it felt as if the world had been ripped from beneath her feet. She collapsed into a chair, wailing in grief, the sound of her cries echoing through the sterile corridors. The man she had shared her life with, the father of her children, was gone. As she wept, 2 nurses who were in their 50s, with faces lined with years of experience, came towards her. They addressed her with a strange calmness and asked her to follow them. They took her to the waiting room and began to console her. When it seemed like she could not be easily consoled, one of them gently took her by the arm and pulled her to the side. "Madam, please try to calm down," the first nurse urged. "You have to think of your baby. You need to be strong." But Grace was too grief-stricken to hear their words. She refused to be consoled. How could they ask her to stop crying? Didn't they understand that her world had just collapsed? Seeing that she wasn't listening, the second nurse leaned in closer and spoke in a hushed, but serious tone. "Do you even know what caused your husband's death?" Through her tears, Grace blinked in confusion. "I was told he collapsed." "What do you mean?" "Yes, but do you know where your husband collapsed?" the nurse asked. Grace shook her head, her mind struggling to comprehend why this was important now. The nurse sighed heavily, as if reluctant to share the truth but feeling it was necessary. "Your husband collapsed in a hotel, with his mistress. He was brought here with no clothes on." Grace froze. Her sobs stopped instantly, the tears drying up as if they had never existed. She stared at the nurse in disbelief, struggling to process what she had just heard. The nurse continued, her voice low but clear. "He was cheating on you, madam. That's where he was when this happened. If I were you, I wouldn't waste my grief on a man who disgraced me like that." And with that, the nurse turned and left the room. The other nurse stayed behind, offering a tissue and a chair for Grace to sit. She handed her a glass of water, trying to provide some comfort, but Grace could hardly move. Her heart pounded in her chest, the betrayal hitting her like a punch in the gut. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, had been lying to her. While she was at home, pregnant with their 4th child, sacrificing her career, her youth, her time for the sake of their family, he had been busy betraying her in the worst possible way. He had died in the arms of another woman, leaving her not only with grief but with humiliation, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. Her mind raced, filled with painful thoughts. How could he do this to me? She had given up her job to stay home and care for their children. She had screamed and saved, barely spending any money on herself, so they could build a future together. And this was how he repaid her. Just then, the door to the waiting room swung open, and her husband's family walked in, all of them in tears. His mother, his brothers, everyone was in tears, and they expected her to be broken and devastated like them. But Grace wasn't sure what she felt anymore. The grief that had overwhelmed her minutes ago was now replaced by cold, hard anger. She stood up slowly, her face composed, almost indifferent. They didn't understand. How could they? She wasn't just mourning the death of her husband, she was mourning the death of her marriage, of everything she thought she knew. They embraced her, expecting tears, but she remained stiff, offering no emotion. Days passed, and Grace handled the funeral arrangements. When she accessed their joint bank account to gather funds, her heart sank even deeper. The balance was far lower than she had expected. Investigating further, she discovered the disturbing truth: her husband had squandered much of their savings, likely spending it on his affairs. The little that was left, she used for the funeral. After the burial, she made a decision that she was not going to live in shame. She refused to wear the traditional mourning clothes that wives were expected to wear when their husbands passed on according to culture. Why should she? She asked herself, why would she honor a man who had betrayed her in such a cruel way? Instead, she decided to focus on her children and the future. With what little money that was left, and donations that came in during the funeral, Grace opened a boutique. She knew she had to take care of her children on her own now. When her in-laws heard her decision to forgo the mourning clothes, they were enraged. They stirred up the entire town against her. The news of what they termed an abomination spread like wildfire, and people gossiped endlessly. Her husband's family insisted that she had to follow tradition, so they summoned her before the family elders and demanded an explanation for such disrespect to their late son. Grace stood before them, calm and composed, and told them everything that she had discovered. The truth about her husband's affair. His collapse in the arms of his mistress. The state of their finances. The shame and betrayal she had been forced to bear. The elders were silent, most were shocked, and some were indifferent. Some of the wives of the elders, with tears in their eyes, began to speak up, saying they could not blame her. They shared that they too had daughters, and they understood her pain, and to an extent they supported her decision. But most of the men stated that she was not the first to find herself in such a situation. As such, she could not be allowed to disrespect tradition in that manner. The chief, after listening to all that both parties had to say, came up with a wise decision that was applauded by all. In an unprecedented move, the chief, in order to keep peace in the town between men and women, as the matter was fast becoming a gender problem, decided to allow Grace to break the town's customs due to her pregnancy. And not because her husband cheated on her. This set a new precedent for all. Grace was happy with the decision as it vindicated her to some extent and gave her a sense of power over her life. She wasn't just a grieving widow, she was a survivor. And she would not hide in shame. The story became the talk of the town, but Grace held her head high, knowing she had nothing to be ashamed of. Her husband had paid the price for his betrayal, and Grace had made sure she and her children would not suffer for it. In the end, Grace emerged stronger from the storm. She learned that betrayal could shatter you, but it didn't have to break you. She refused to be a victim any longer and forged a new path for herself, standing tall in the face of the whispers and the gossip. She was now living life on her own terms. Thank you for watching up to this point. We'd like to take a moment to highlight some valuable lessons from this story. Number 1. Never underestimate the value of resilience in the face of adversity. In the story, even in the face of deep betrayal and loss, the woman showed incredible strength to rebuild her life. This should remind us all that no matter how dark a situation may seem, resilience can lead to new and better opportunities. 2. Healing takes time. Her journey from grief to renewal shows us that healing is a process. It's okay to take your time to move forward from emotional pain, stay focused and know that in the end, you will come out stronger. 3. You are not defined by others' actions. The betrayal was her husband's mistake, not hers, and she recognized that. This should remind us that someone else's actions do not determine our value, and we should never carry shame for their wrongdoings. If you found this story meaningful, please like the video, subscribe to our channel for more insightful stories, and share this video with others who might benefit from it. Also, let us know in the comments which part of the story resonated with you the most. We'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next video. Bye.